This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER tale One of Our Dinosaurs Is Missing by WALT Disney Productions. The time was the early 1920s. In China, cruel warlords ruled the people and foreigners were not always welcome. But Lord Southmere, an enterprising young English businessman, wasn't afraid. He boldly went to China, gained possession of the super-secret Lotus X formula and smuggled it out of the country, practically under the nose of the fierce warlord Marshal Wu Zai. Wu Zai's vengeance, however, would reach halfway around the world to London, resulting in the strange case of the missing dinosaur. VIEW-MASTER Reel A, Picture 1. Disguised as a Chinese coolie and wearing a fake moustache, Southmere slipped out of China in a most unusual way, swinging from a huge kite. Then there followed a long journey by train across Siberia and Europe. At last Southmere, with his formula on a tiny piece of microfilm, was safe in London. Safe, did we say? Well, not exactly. When he stepped into his waiting limousine at a railroad station, he noticed that the driver, a stranger wearing dark glasses, turned into the wrong street. "Kensington Road, driver," Southmere commanded. The driver took off his dark glasses, and Southmere saw that he was a Chinese. Do not make fuss, your lordship," he said. "We are followed closely by friends of mine, the radiant Master Knob Van himself and his assistant, Quan. You have stolen Lotus X. Our great leader in China, Marshal Wu Zai, wants it back." Looking back, Southmere saw a large sedan. In it were two grim-faced Chinese, Picture 2. They were approaching the Natural History Museum. The limousine suddenly slowed to avoid a nanny, children's nursemaid, who was pushing a pram, baby carriage, across the street before them. Seeing his chance, Southmere opened the car door, leaped out and sprinted toward the museum entrance. The sedan behind him halted, and the two Chinese men jumped out and raced after Southmere. He, meanwhile, had rushed into the museum's entrance lobby, which was filled with nannies, children and prams. Picture 3. Seizing a large empty pram, Southmere wheeled it rapidly away, trying to climb inside it to hide. "That man stole my pram," exclaimed Hetty, one of the nannies. "Outrageous! He won't get far," vowed her friend Emily grimly. Picture 4. The two nannies hurried after Southmere, who by now was out of sight. He had reached the dinosaur hall, which was empty of people. A sign at the entrance said, "Hall closed for redecoration." He entered regardless, clutching his umbrella tightly, for inside its hollow handle was the precious microfilm. Where could he hide Lotus X temporarily? Before him loomed two huge dinosaur skeletons. Each was draped with painter's protective sheets, hung over temporary scaffolding. Southmere ran to the larger dinosaur. He hooked the handle of his umbrella into his collar and, using both hands, began to climb to the top of the skeleton. Picture 5. Reaching the backbone, he straddled it and inched his way up the long neck. Finally, he unscrewed the umbrella handle, took out the tiny piece of film, leaned forward and placed it into a bony cavity. Suddenly, He lost his balance and tumbled to the floor, striking his head. He sat up groggily and got to his feet. As he staggered across the hall, he came face to face with Hetty and Emily. "Young man," demanded Hetty, "why did you take that pram?" "Awfully sorry," mumbled Southmere. Then, in sudden recognition, "Nanny, Nanny, it's you!" She stared at him in turn. "Master Edward, how my little boy has grown!" "Of course I've grown, Nanny. I was only 6 when you left." He rubbed his head. "I'm afraid I had a bit of a fall. I don't seem to." He stumbled and fell again. As they kneeled over him in concern, he said, "Nanny, listen carefully. I'm on a vital mission. It's Lotus X on a very small piece of film. I hide it on the dinosaur. You must find it before the others do." He fell back unconscious. Picture 6. Nub 1 and Quan, hurrying along the corridor, saw them and approached, bowing. "Can I be of assistance, ladies?" asked Nub 1. "I'm well known as doctor in my own country." Quan threw Southmere over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and they walked rapidly away. Southmere awoke to find himself a prisoner in the basement of a Chinese supper club. The reluctant dragon, which served as a front for Nub 1's headquarters in Soho. Questioned by Nub 1 and Quan about Lotus X, Southmere told them that he honestly couldn't remember where he had put it. "That bump I got in the old noggin," he said. "I'm afraid it put my memory on the fritz." "Wait a moment," exclaimed Nub 1 suddenly. "That nanny in museum, you were talking to her as we came up. Either she has Lotus X or she knows where you put it." He turned to his assistant. "Quan, find that nanny." Picture 7. Quan knew that British nannies often took children to parks. But which park should he try first? He went to St. James Park, and sure enough, it was full of nannies, children, and prams. One nanny from the back looked like Hetty. Trying to get in front of her to see her face, he tripped over the low rail at the edge of a lake and fell in with a big splash, setting geese and ducks squawking in alarm. Meanwhile, Hetty was in Hyde Park, telling Emily, "We must search the dinosaur. We shall need help, young help." By that afternoon she had collected 8 young nannies and was telling them, "It's important. Meet me at the Natural History Museum tonight," 10 minutes before closing time. That night the nannies hid inside the skeleton of a huge whale till the museum closed and lights were out. VIEW-MASTER Reel B. Picture 1. In Dinosaur Hall, Hetty assigned each nanny a section of the dinosaur to search. Soon all 8 were clambering over and under the skeleton, but after 2 hours, including a tea break, they had found nothing. "Thank you all for coming," sighed Hetty regretfully. "Be quiet when you climb out through the window." One young nanny, a blonde named Susan, stayed with Hetty and Emily. A sudden sound startled them. There stood Quan. "Come with me, please," he said. Picture 2. In the office of Nub 1, the radiant master prepared to pour the ladies some tea. "Your plot in park today was overhard. he explained. You searched dinosaur for lotus eggs. Why? Hetty, who had been staring at him, interrupted. I thought I recognized you, but so grown up now. You were little Panda Nose, son of the Chinese ambassador. Finally convinced that the nannies didn't know where Lotus X was, Nub Van let them go. Then he said to Quan, I have decided we steal the dinosaur. Steal the dinosaur? Gasped Quan. Take it to our warehouse, continued Nub Van. There we pick it apart till we find secret formula. Quan obtained a large flatbed steam truck to transport the dinosaur and a chara bank or open-sided bus to carry 20 Chinese workmen. He painted a banner and hung it on the side of the chara bank. Limehouse Harmony Club, annual outing. Emily, meanwhile, keeping a lookout on the reluctant dragon, saw the strange vehicles pull up in front of the supper club that afternoon. Chinese poured out of the building and into the vehicles, which began to move. Emily found they were headed for the Natural History Museum. She hopped onto her motorcycle and hurried to rejoin Hetty and Susan. Quick, she cried, we must find out what they're up to. Picture 3. With Hetty in the sidecar and Susan perched behind Emily, the cycle roared off toward the museum. Meanwhile, the Chinese arrived at the museum's rear entrance. Nub Van bluffing the curator into thinking they were delivering a collection of cultural objects from Peking, persuaded him to open the large delivery door. The big flatbed truck packed up to it. Picture 4. As the nannies arrived and hid in a clump of bushes, they heard Nub One tell his workmen, Bring dinosaur out now. Careful not to damage marble floor. The nannies gasped. Now they knew what the Chinese were up to. So did the curator. He pushed the alarm button and museum guards came running. Each guard was met by a Chinese kung fu expert who laid him low with a quick kick or jab. The workmen attached ropes to the dinosaur. Slowly they moved it toward the exit. Picture 5. The workmen pulled the skeleton onto the truck and tied it down with ropes. A typical London evening fog was beginning to creep over the landscape. Picture 6. As Quan started to leave, he looked back at the dinosaur and shouted, It's alive! It's moving! The startled Chinese stared. Indeed, the huge skeleton was beginning to glide forward through the fog. It is not dinosaur that moves, you idiots, stormed Nub One. It is truck that moves. Who is driving? Picture 7. Hetty at the steering wheel of the big truck felt a thrill of achievement. The 3 nannies had hijacked the dinosaur right under Nub Van's nose. As Hetty accelerated to full speed, skidding around turns, Emily and Susan held their breaths. Susan looked back. They're after us, she cried. Don't worry, said Hetty. I'll get those Chinese gentlemen so lost that no one will see them again. She drove the ponderous truck like a sports car. In first one London neighborhood and then another, people were startled out of their wits to see a huge prehistoric skeleton moving rapidly through a sea of rolling fog. VIEW-MASTER Reel 3. Picture 1. At Scotland Yard headquarters, Inspector Eppers brought a crime report to Superintendent Grubbs. "Couple of pockets picked, sir," he said. "Otherwise, everything's quiet. Bank holiday, you know." Neither of them saw the head of a gigantic dinosaur moving behind them. By daybreak, Hetty had piloted the truck out of the city and into the green countryside. She was looking for a safe place to hide the dinosaur. Seeing a dense thicket ahead, she turned off the road and drove into it. It proved to be a perfect hiding place. Leaving Emily and Susan to watch the dinosaur, she hitchhiked back to London to keep an eye on Lord Southmere. In London, the newspapers had finally discovered the fact of the missing dinosaur and were playing it up with big headlines. Grubbs and his Scotland Yard detectives were inspecting every inch of Dinosaur Hall. Noob 1, visiting the hall in disguise, made the startling discovery that all along it had contained a second dinosaur. Suspecting that the wrong dinosaur had been taken, he waited until no one else was in the hall. Picture 2. Climbing a ladder to the dinosaur's neck, Noob 1 reached into a cavity, felt something and drew it out. To his joy, it was a tiny piece of microfilm. Hetty soon learned from Southmere that the Chinese had gained possession of Lotus X. Fearing for his safety now, she determined to get all the nannies she could find and go rescue him. Emily, when she telephoned Hetty from the country, was told of the plan. "Hanging up, Emily," told Susan. "I'm not going to let that woman get into trouble without me. We're heading back to London with this dinosaur." That night, in the reluctant dragon, Hetty entered Noob 1's office, seized Southmere's arm and ushered him out. Chinese guards raced in pursuit and came thundering into the main room of the Supper Club. There they were met by a determined army of nannies. Picture 3. Punching, jabbing with umbrellas, slugging with handbags, the nannies attacked. A Chinese, attempting a kung fu kick, received a well-placed kick of the same kind from a meek-looking nanny. Picture 4. All this time, a juggler was calmly continuing his act. Hetty stood behind him. When he changed from balls to Indian clubs, she seized one in mid-air and hurled it at Quan's head, felling him. At Scotland Yard, Grubbs and Eppers, hearing of the disturbance, rushed to the reluctant dragon. Picture 5. Emily, Susan and the dinosaur had come steaming into London by now and were heading for the reluctant dragon also. As Emily piloted the truck rapidly across a street, she confided to Susan, "I don't like to tell you this, but our brakes are gone. The truck slammed into the front of the Supper Club. The dinosaur's head and neck came through the window. Picture 6. The dinosaur's head came to rest on the table of a visiting Texas couple, Mr. and Mrs. B.J. Spence. "Now that's real nice of them," B.J. told his wife enthusiastically. "Happy birthday, Linda Sue." Picture 7. Grubbs and Scotland Yard took over at this point. Grubbs telephoned the British Home Secretary. "I have recovered a stolen dinosaur, sir, and we may now consider the case closed," he said importantly. The police returned Lotus X to Southmere. Projecting the film on a screen, he revealed its secret at last to Hetty, Emily, Susan, and a now friendly Noob 1. It was a recipe for Chinese wonton soup.